They say every state has its monsters. But in Maryland, our nightmares are woven into the very fabric of the landscape. Forget the charming lighthouses and picturesque harbors for a moment. We're going deep into the dark woods of Prince George County and the murky history of the Chesapeake Bay to hunt down the 5 most disturbing stories this state has to offer. This is where folklore and history collide. We'll confront the horrifying truth behind the creature known as the Goatman. Revisit the final, delirious days of the Master of Terror, Edgar Allan Poe, and unearth the unsettling history that makes entire towns like Ellicott City hotbeds for the paranormal. If you're brave enough to face these true Maryland legends, give this video a thumbs up right now to open the portal. And click that subscribe button with the bell so you never miss a dose of regional dread. Let the hunt begin. You know, there's a difference between a ghost story and this. A ghost story is about something that's gone. It's an echo. It's a memory with unfinished business. It's sad, sure. It can be scary. But it's still human. This story, our third story, it's not about what's gone. It's about what's still out there. It's not an echo. It's a scream that never stopped. It's not human, not anymore. And it's a story I've lived with my whole life, growing up here in Maryland. It's our story. It's our monster. I'm talking, of course, about the Goatman. Now, you might have heard the name. Maybe you saw it on some late-night paranormal show, sandwiched between Bigfoot and the Jersey Devil. You probably laughed. A Goatman? Sounds ridiculous, right? Sounds like something a kid made up. That's what you think when you're safe, in the light, in the city. But you haven't driven the back roads of Prince George's County after midnight? You haven't been on Fletchertown Road in Bowie or Governor's Bridge Road, where the trees knit together overhead so tightly that the moonlight can't even get in. Where you drive over a one-lane bridge and the only sound is the gravel crunching under your tires, and you get that cold, prickly feeling on the back of your neck. The feeling that you're being watched. That's his territory, and out there, nobody laughs. You see, everyone around here knows the story, and we all know the place it was born. It starts just outside of Bowie, in a place that's real, a place you can go look at. The Beltsville Agricultural Research Center, BRC. It's a massive, sprawling government facility. Over 6,000 acres of federal land full of labs and fields and deep, dark woods. For decades, they've done all kinds of experiments out there. Crop hybrids, livestock studies, genetics, and that's where the story begins. The official story anyway. The one they whisper about. The legend says there was a scientist, back in the 50s or 60s. Some people say his name was Dr. Stephen Fletcher, which is why Fletchertown Road is the epicenter. He was brilliant, they say. But he was reckless. He was working on something he shouldn't have been. He was deep into genetics, messing with the building blocks of life. His project? Trying to create, well, who knows what he was trying to create? A hardier livestock? A new species? All we know is that he was working with goat DNA. And, so the story goes, he started splicing it. He pushed the boundaries. He went too far. Maybe it was an accident. Maybe he injected himself. Or maybe he was trying to bind the DNA with something else. Something human. The experiment didn't just go wrong. It was a catastrophe. The thing he created, it wasn't a goat, and it wasn't a man. It was both. It was both. A grotesque hybrid, standing on 2-hoofed feet covered in coarse hair, with the raging primal instincts of a goat and the cunning, hateful intelligence of a man. And it was strong. Unnaturally strong. It destroyed the lab. It tore its creator, Dr. Fletcher, to pieces. And then it escaped. It fled from the lights and the sirens, from the sterile labs of bark, and it ran into the one place it felt safe. It ran into the deep, primal woods of Prince George's County, and it's been there ever since. It survives out there. It hunts, and it hates. It hates people. It hates the world that made it. And it especially hates anyone who trespasses on its territory. But that's not the only story. That's the science one. There's an older one, darker maybe. This one says there was no lab. There was just a man. A goat herd who lived alone on the outskirts of Bowie, back when it was all just farmland and tobacco fields. He was a recluse. The kids all made fun of him. They'd sneak onto his property, spook his goats, call him names. One night, a group of teenagers went too far. They didn't just spook the goats. They killed them, slaughtered his whole herd just for a laugh. The old man, they say, snapped. His mind just broke. He was so filled with grief and rage that he put on the skin of his favorite goat and he went out looking for revenge. He found those kids. And he did to them what they did to his flock. They say he never stopped, that he just became the Goatman, a wild, vengeful spirit of the woods, forever protecting his territory. And in this version, he has a weapon. It's not claws, not teeth. It's an axe. A rusty, heavy woodsman's axe. And he's not just an animal. He's a killer. Which story is true? Does it matter? Both roads lead to the same dark place. A monster in the woods. A monster with an axe. I know what you're thinking. Come on. It's just a story. It's a bogeyman to scare kids. That's what I thought too. Until you start hearing the other stories. The eyewitness stories. The ones told by people who aren't laughing. Let me tell you about my uncle's friend back in the 70s. This was the peak of the Goatman panic. It was a real thing. It was in the Washington Post. It was in the local papers. A family in Bowie, the Girdlers, reported that their new puppy, a little German shepherd named Ginger, had vanished. A few days later, they found it. Or they found what was left of it. It was just the head, cleanly severed. Lying in the middle of Fletchertown Road, the police were called. They investigated. They blamed a car, or maybe a train, from the nearby tracks. But the family said, no, this wasn't an animal. This wasn't a car. It was, they said, a professional, neat job. Who does that? What animal does that? The papers ran the story, and the floodgates opened. People started calling in, terrified. They'd seen it. A large, hairy, bipedal creature. It had horns. It was growling, a sound I've never heard before. It was a full-blown panic. People were locking their doors. The police were running patrols looking for, what? A man in a suit? A real monster? Of course, they never found anything. The panic died down. The papers stopped reporting. But the stories never stopped. The most famous one, the one we all grew up with, is the Lover's Lane story. You know the one. Every town has one. But ours has a different ending. The story always goes like this. A young couple, high school kids, they're parked out on Governor's Bridge Road. It's late, it's dark. They're doing what kids do. And then they hear it. A sound. A scrape. Scrr. Chow. Thump. It's coming from the woods. The girl gets spooked. What was that? The boy, trying to be brave, says, it's nothing. Just a branch. Thump. 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 It's closer now. It sounds heavy. It sounds like something walking on 2 feet. But not. Right. The footsteps are heavy, then a click. Heavy, then a click. Like a boot and a hoof. Thump. click, thump, click. Now they're both scared. Please, the girl says, let's just go. The boy fumbles with the keys. He turns the ignition. The engine roars to life, and as he throws the car into gear, he hears another sound, a loud, metallic THW whack against the trunk. He doesn't wait. He slams the gas pedal to the floor. The tires spin on the gravel. The car fishtails, and he speeds out of there, not stopping until he's back in his neighborhood, back under the streetlights. He pulls into the driveway, breathing hard, his heart hammering. He's laughing now. Nerves. See? He tells his girlfriend. It was nothing. But what was that noise? She asks. When we drove off? That loud bang? I probably just ran over a log, he says. I'll check. He gets out of the car. He walks around to the back, and he starts screaming. He doesn't stop screaming. His girlfriend gets out, and she sees it too. It wasn't a log he hit. And it wasn't a branch they heard. Embedded deep in the metal of the trunk, wedged into the steel, is a rusty, blood-stained woodsman's axe. That's the story they tell. But there are others. Dozens of them. People who have broken down on those roads. They sit in their dark, dead cars waiting for a tow truck. And they hear things moving in the trees just beyond the headlights. They hear a high-pitched shriek, a sound that's half goat, half man. They see two red eyes reflecting in the dark. And then there's the smell. People always mention the smell. A thick, musky, primal smell. The smell of a wet animal. The smell of a slaughterhouse. Hikers who go into the woods around Bowie and are chased out by something they can't explain. They come back to their cars and they find a warning. A deep gouge in the paint. An axe mark carved into a nearby tree. There's a bridge out there. Governor's Bridge. A single-lane iron bridge built in the 1800s. It's been closed for years. It's all rust and graffiti now. That's his bridge. We used to dare each other to go out there. Go stand on Goatman's bridge. Most kids won't even get out of the car. A few years ago, some friends of mine, they went. They were filming something, a dumb high school project. They were on the bridge, and they started hearing it. Footsteps. Thump, click. Thump, click. Coming from the far end of the bridge, from the darkness. They ran. They jumped in their car and they tore out of there. They didn't get their footage. But when they got home and they were watching what they did get, they saw it. Or they saw something, just for a second, in the background, at the edge of the woods. You couldn't make it out clearly. It was blurry. But it was tall. It was dark, and it was standing on two legs. They deleted the footage. They don't talk about it. They don't go back. So, what is it? What is the Goatman? Is he a genetic experiment gone wrong? A monster of science? Hiding out in the woods, just yards from the nation's capital? Is he the vengeful spirit of a murdered farmer, forever bound to his land, protecting it with an axe? Or is he something else? Maybe he's just a story, a myth, an urban legend born from a combination of a real, weird-sounding government facility, a tragically killed dog, and the natural fear of the dark woods. Maybe he's just a boogeyman we created because the truth is too boring. That's the rational explanation. That's the one you tell yourself in the daylight. But I've been on those roads. I've been to the ruins of Fletchertown. I've stood at the gate of that one-lane bridge, and I can tell you, when the sun goes down and the fog rolls in off the Patuxent River and the only light is your high beams cutting a little yellow tunnel in the dark, rationality doesn't feel like much protection. You'll be driving. You'll be listening to the radio. And you'll hit a bump. Thump. And your first thought won't be pothole. Your first thought will be, was that on the road or was that on the roof? You'll grip the steering wheel. You'll check your mirrors and you'll press your foot down on the gas. And you won't look back. The Goatman of Maryland. He's our monster. And the reason we're so afraid of him, the reason the story never dies, it's because in those woods, just outside the suburbs, in that sliver of darkness between the known and the unknown, he feels real. He feels more real than anything. So, if you're ever in Prince George's County and you decide to go looking for him, don't. Just don't. We begin our analysis not with a crime scene, but with a psyche. Most disturbing stories are a chronicle of an act, a violation, an event that ruptures the norm. This is not one of those stories. This is the story of a trajectory. It is the clinical case file of a compulsion that was born in shadow, nurtured in anonymity, and executed with chilling precision. This is not a whodunit. We know who did it. This is not even, in the classical sense, a why-done-it. The motive was declared, documented, and agreed upon in writing. This is the case of Sharon Rena Lopatka, and it is, perhaps, the purest example of psychological horror in the Maryland archives, because the monster in this story was not an external force. It was an internal, meticulously cultivated desire. The victim was not hunted. She was a client. The killer was not an assailant. He was a service provider. This is the story of a consensual homicide. On the surface, subject Sharon Lopatka, 35, presented as a model of suburban normalcy. She lived in a tidy home in Hampstead, Maryland, a quiet town in Carroll County. She was married to a man, Victor, an analyst. She was, by all accounts, bright and articulate. She had a background in marketing. She was an entrepreneur, running several small businesses from her home. This was 1996. The world was just waking up to a new, sprawling, and ungoverned frontier, the internet. It was a digital Wild West, a place of infinite connection and, for the first time, perfect segmentation. You could be anyone, you could find anything, and you could find anyone who wanted the same things you did, no matter how dark, no matter how forbidden. For Sharon Lopatka, the internet was not a tool, it was a mirror. Her businesses were a digital facade. Under the name Classified Concepts, she wrote advertising copy. She also ran websites, small digital storefronts for psychic readings, and other premium rate phone services. This was her public-facing online persona. It was unremarkable. Her private persona was a different entity entirely. In the glowing green and black phosphorescence of 1990s newsgroups and chat rooms, the unpoliced basements of the early web, Sharon was not Sharon. She was Nancy. She was Kink or Carlson. And her posts were not advertisements. They were solicitations. This is the primary vector of the pathology. For months, perhaps years, Lopatka had been curating a fantasy. It was not a simple fantasy of submission. It was a detailed architectural blueprint for her own obliteration. She posted hundreds of messages, each a small window into a psyche obsessed with its own end. She wrote, under her aliases, of a desire to be used, tortured, and killed. She didn't just want pain, she wanted annihilation. She didn't just want submission, she wanted termination. Her posts were explicit. She was looking for a partner, someone who would not just pretend to kill her, but who would, in fact, end her life, and do so in a specific, brutal, and sexualized manner. We must pause here to analyze the nature of this desire. This was not a passive death wish. It was not a cry for help. It was an active, logistical pursuit. She was, in effect, hiring a contractor for her own murder. She fielded responses. She vetted candidates. More than one person who encountered her online tried to intervene. An activist for sex workers, alarmed by the genuine, non-performative nature of Lopatka's posts, tried to reason with her. Lopatka's reply was blunt. I want the real thing. In August of 1996, she found a respondent who was willing to bid on the project. His online handle was Slowhand. The subject's correspondent was Robert Frederick Glass, 45, a computer analyst for the county government in rural North Carolina. Like Lopatka, Glass maintained a veneer of normalcy. He was a father of 3. He was separated from his wife, Sherry, but was, by all accounts, a quiet, unremarkable employee. His wife, however, had seen the other side. She had separated from him just months earlier in May. The reason? She had logged onto his computer. She had found the emails. She had seen the side of him that lived in the dark. She found messages, as she would later describe them, that were raw, violent, and disturbing. Slowhand, the toyman, was the persona he used to explore his own violent, sadistic, and dominant fantasies. When Lopatka, as Nancy, posted her request, Glass, as Slowhand, replied. A perfect psychological lock and key. The woman who wanted to be tortured and killed had found the man who, in his digital life, fantasized about torturing and killing. For 6 weeks, from late August to October 1996, the two exchanged hundreds of emails. We have access to this correspondence, and it is the central evidence in this case. It is a 900-page script for a murder. The emails are a disturbing blend of mundane logistics and grotesque fantasy. They read like a business negotiation. They discussed tools. They discussed methods. They confirmed, over and over, that this was not a role play. Lopatka wrote to Glass, I am fantasizing about your torturing me. She detailed explicitly what she wanted done to her. She wanted to be bound, gagged, and asphyxiated. She wanted to suffer. She wanted it to be real. Glass replied in kind. He described in graphic detail how he would fulfill her desires. He promised her it would be the real thing. He assured her he had the stomach for it. He told her he would be her master, and she, his slave. He told her he would end her, and that she would die in ecstasy. The correspondence is devoid of passion in the traditional sense. It is cold. It is technical. It is 2 people methodically planning an event. Lopatka was not just a participant. She was the architect. She was planning her own death. And she was, by all indications, excited. This is the psychological crux. Lopatka was not depressed in a way that leads to a note and a bottle of pills. Her fantasy was not about being dead. It was about the process of dying. It was the ultimate, final, and irreversible act of masochism. She had, in her mind, found the one experience that could satisfy a lifetime of dark compulsion. They set a date. On the morning of October 13th, 1996, Sharon Lopatka was at her home in Hampstead. She told her husband, Victor, a cover story. She was going to Georgia for a few days to meet some friends. It was a plausible lie, given her online businesses. But she left something behind. It was a note, and this note is, perhaps, the single most disturbing piece of evidence in the entire case. It was not a suicide note. It was a release form. The note was addressed to her husband. It read, If my body is never retrieved, don't worry. Know that I am at peace. She went on, writing that she was not returning. And then, the most chilling line, a line that removes all doubt of her agency in this act, she asked her husband not to go after the one who did this to her. She was not only consenting to her death, she was actively protecting her killer in advance. She was, in her final act of communication in the real world, attempting to grant him immunity. She drove her car 45 minutes to Baltimore's Penn Station. She boarded an Amtrak train. She traveled south to Charlotte, North Carolina, at 8:45 p.m. On October 13th, she arrived. Robert Slowhand. Glass was there to meet her. He drove her in his pickup truck from the station to his home. a small, cluttered mobile home in a rural area of Lenoir, North Carolina. For 3 days, Sharon Lopatka lived inside her fantasy. We do not know and cannot know the exact psychological state of the subject during these 72 hours. We can only infer, based on the digital record, she was a willing participant. She was, by her own definition, at peace. She was, finally, getting the real thing. Back in Maryland, Victor Lopatka grew worried. His wife hadn't called. This was unusual. On October 20th, 1 week after she left, he reported her missing to the Maryland State Police. And here, the case pivots. This is where the digital world and the physical world collided. When a state trooper arrived at the Lopatka home, he took the standard report, but something caught his eye: the computer. In 1996, this was not yet a standard piece of investigative procedure, but Victor Lopatka mentioned that his wife spent a great deal of her time online. The trooper called in a specialist, Sergeant Barry Lease. The police, with Victor's consent, took the computer. They began a forensic analysis of the hard drive, and there they found it. The entire digital life of Nancy, the postings, the chat logs, and, most importantly, the 900 pages of email correspondence with Slowhand. The police were not just reading fantasies. They were reading a murder plot. They saw the emails from Glass, detailing how he would torture and kill her. They saw the emails from her, begging him to do it. They saw the travel arrangements. They saw his real name, his location. The investigation was no longer a missing persons case. It was a manhunt. But it was a manhunt where the police had the killer's name, his address, and a signed confession, all provided by the victim. Maryland State Police contacted the authorities in North Carolina. On October 25, 1996, police began staking out Robert Glass's mobile home. They watched him. They saw no sign of Sharon. They watched him go to work, come home, live his life as if nothing had happened. They obtained a search warrant. When they entered the trailer, they found what they expected: bondage equipment, drugs, and items belonging to Sharon Lopatka. But they did not find Sharon. An officer walked the property. The trailer was messy, cluttered with trash and toys. About 75 feet from the home, the officer noticed a patch of disturbed soil, a fresh mound. They began to dig. They found her, 5 feet down. She was buried in a shallow grave. The autopsy, performed by North Carolina's chief medical examiner, confirmed the cause of death: ligature strangulation. She had been asphyxiated, just as she had requested. The autopsy report stated she was killed on October 16th, 3 days after she arrived. Robert Glass was arrested at his desk, at his county government job. He was charged with first-degree murder. The case that followed was a legal and ethical nightmare. How do you prosecute a murder when the victim has 900 pages of emails begging to be killed? Glass, for his part, tried to create a new narrative. His lawyer claimed it was an accident, consensual sex gone wrong. Glass himself, in a later interview, would claim, "I don't know how much I pulled the rope. I never wanted to kill her, but she ended up dead." This claim is functionally irrelevant. It is a self-serving statement contradicted by months of digital premeditation. The police and prosecutors, armed with the emails, did not believe him. The affidavits were clear. Additional email messages described in detail how Slowhand was going to sexually torture the missing person and ultimately kill her. The defense was not that he didn't do it. The defense was that it was an accident in the process of fulfilling her fantasy. This case was a media sensation. It was death on the internet. It was the first terrifying example for the public of the dangers of this new, anonymous world. It fed a moral panic. But the panic missed the point. The internet was not the cause. It was the tool. It was the vector that allowed two compulsions, a sadistic one and a masochistic one, to find each other across hundreds of miles. The legal system, built to handle traditional violence, struggled. The charge of first-degree murder was eventually dropped. Robert Glass pleaded guilty to the lesser charge of voluntary manslaughter. He was sentenced to a maximum of 53 months in prison, a disturbingly light sentence for a man who had tortured and killed a woman, but a reflection of the legal quagmire her consent had created. This is the final disturbing coda to the case file. The system, in the end, almost agreed with the premise. It treated her death not as a brutal murder, but as a reckless act, a kind of assisted suicide. Robert Glass would never be released. He died in prison of a heart attack just a few years into his sentence. The case of Sharon Lopatka is a closed file, but it is not a solved one. The how is simple, a rope. The who is simple, Robert Glass. But the why remains locked inside the psyche of a 35-year-old woman from Hampstead, Maryland, who meticulously, successfully, and tragically engineered her own destruction. She was not a victim in the way we understand it. She was a subject who completed her own final dark project, and her story remains one of the most chilling case studies of the digital age, a testament to the fact that sometimes the most terrifying journey is not the one into the woods, but the one into the self. And sometimes, when you go looking for a monster in the dark, you find one who is more than willing to answer the call. This is the story of a place, a low, sandy spit of land in St. Mary's County, Maryland, where the Potomac River empties its cold waters into the vastness of the Chesapeake Bay. It is a place of desolate, wind-swept beauty. Today, it is known as one of the most haunted locations in America. But the horror here is not fabricated. It is not folklore. It is documented, recorded history. The ghosts that wander this point are not spectral inventions. They are the echoes of documented, mass human suffering. We speak now of Point Lookout, the site of the Civil War prison camp, a place whose true history is far more brutal and disturbing than any ghost story could ever be. In the summer of 1862, the Union Army established a hospital here. It was a strategic point, remote, accessible only by water, and defensible. But the great catastrophe of the American Civil War, the endless, overwhelming tide of captured soldiers, quickly transformed this point from a place of healing into a place of containment. In August 1863, the hospital was converted into the largest prisoner of war camp in the Union. It was a simple, stark transformation. A high wooden palisade, 10 feet tall, was erected around a 30-acre triangular plot of ground. Inside, the land was flat, exposed, and sandy. The perimeter was lined with a dead line, a low wooden railing that no man could cross without being shot by the guards in the surrounding watchtowers. This enclosure was built to hold 10,000 men. Within a year, the Union forces began shipping captured Confederate soldiers here in staggering numbers. By the end of the war, the total number of prisoners processed through this hellish 30 acres approached 52,000. The horror of Point Lookout, the true, unspeakable tragedy, is found in the relentless, systemic overcrowding and neglect. Imagine the reality. An area designed for 10,000 men was soon crammed with upwards of 20,000 prisoners. The ground was marshy. There were no trees for shade, no drainage for rain, and no protection from the elements. The men lived not in barracks, but in communal tents, often designed for 5 men but holding 15 or more. The sheer density was a catalyst for biological devastation. The winter of 1863-1864 was ferocious. The tents, anchored directly in the sandy earth, were poor protection against the brutal winds sweeping off the bay. Diaries from the prisoners, the primary source of this chronological horror, speak of waking up to find their blankets frozen to the canvas. They speak of men who went to sleep and never woke up, their bodies rigid with cold. The conditions were not just harsh, they were conducive to a rapid, mass extinction event. The greatest killer at Point Lookout was not the Union Guard with the rifle. It was disease. Sanitation was non-existent. A single stream of water running through the center of the camp served as both the source of drinking water and the sewer. Dysentery, typhoid fever, and smallpox spread through the captive population with the speed and lethality of wildfire. A Confederate surgeon, Dr. George W. Nelson, captured and held at Point Lookout, kept a meticulous record of the mounting toll. His notes read like a catalog of despair. The diet is barely sufficient to sustain life and health, and utterly insufficient for the sick. The number of deaths is enormous. The daily ration was a mere sliver of bread, a small piece of meat, and weak coffee. The men were starving. They watched their comrades shrink to skeletal forms. They resorted to desperate measures. Many hunted the camp's rats, cooking and eating them. They boiled roots and grass just to put something warm in their stomachs. The guards were often hardened veterans or members of the United States Colored Troops, USCT, many of whom had fought their way to freedom and harbored no sympathy for the defeated Confederate cause. Tensions were constant, often boiling over into outright cruelty. The deadline was an ever-present, terrifying threat. Crossing it, even accidentally, meant instant death. Stories abound of men, delirious with fever or simply desperate for a drink of cleaner water, stumbling over the low barrier and being instantly executed. It was less a boundary and more a lethal tripwire. The death rate became catastrophic. By the war's end, estimates placed the number of Confederate prisoners who died at Point Lookout between 3,000 and 4,000 men. This number is likely conservative, given the chaos of record-keeping. The daily ritual of death was the darkest part of life at the point. Each morning, the prisoners collected the bodies of the dead and carried them to the gate. They were then piled onto wagons, carted a short distance away, and dumped into trenches that served as mass graves. The burial parties were themselves prisoners, burying their friends one day, knowing they might be buried the next. The records tell of a specific kind of horror in the hospital, which was itself overwhelmed. When a man was near death from smallpox or typhoid, he was often placed on the outer edge of the crowded tent, a marker tied to his toe. When the marker was pulled in the morning, the body was added to the death wagon. The men died in silence, alone in a crowd of thousands, their only mark of distinction, a piece of string. This level of institutional mass death born not of battle, but of policy, neglect, and overcrowding is the profound, true horror of Point Lookout. It is this historical suffering that feeds the modern legend of the haunting. The spirits here are documented not by mediums, but by men of history. Over 3,000 men died on this desolate piece of Maryland land. Their suffering was absolute. This is why, today, the Point Lookout Lighthouse is consistently cited as one of the most intensely haunted sites on the eastern seaboard. Visitors, guards, and paranormal investigators report phenomena that are too numerous and too specific to be dismissed. They hear the coughing fits of the afflicted, the rattle of chain and shackle. They hear disembodied voices, often speaking in a low, agonizing groan. They hear the phantom footsteps of sentries patrolling the now-vanished deadline. The most disturbing reports involve the residual energy of the suffering. People who visit the point report sudden, inexplicable waves of profound despair, extreme physical weakness, and acute hunger. They are not feeling afraid. They are feeling the suffering of the men who starved and froze here. The ghost of a lone Confederate soldier is sometimes seen patrolling the water's edge, his face gaunt, his uniform in tatters. He is not a malevolent entity. He is a man frozen in his moment of greatest misery. Point Lookout is, in the end, a devastating truth about human brutality during wartime. It is a reminder that the most terrifying phantoms are often the physical remnants of true tragedy. The horror is not in the jump scare of a ghost. The horror is in the knowledge that this ground, this quiet, beautiful Maryland park, drank the life and the hope of thousands of men. The ground here is consecrated not by ceremony, but by the suffering of the dead. And when you stand on that lonely spit of land, with the wind tearing at your coat and the waves crashing against the memorial, you are not standing in a haunted park. You are standing in a cemetery of men forgotten by history who continue to use the language of the grave, the creak, the whisper, the moan to tell their terrible, documented story. They are not ghosts. They are the chronicles of a tragedy that must never be forgotten. Hush. Listen now. Listen not to the clatter of our own time, but to the grim, rain-swept whispers of Baltimore in 1849. This is a story that defies the sterile logic of the police blotter. It is a story rooted not in a single act of violence, but in the slow, agonizing, and ultimately inexplicable disintegration of a soul. It is the final, true horror of the man who gave us the definition of horror. We speak now of Edgar Allan Poe, the master of the macabre, the architect of the abyss, the poet who looked into the heart of darkness and named it Nevermore. For a mind so obsessed with meticulous structure, with the logic of the detective and the terrible beauty of decay, his final chapter is a work of utter, chaotic madness. It is a mystery so profound, so baffling, that it casts a perpetual shadow upon the city of Baltimore, a city that both birthed and consumed him. We must approach this narrative not as an investigation, but as an autopsy of the spirit. We must examine the decay. The final days of the poet begin with a journey toward the sun, a journey that promised renewal but delivered ruin. In the autumn of 1849, Poe was not yet the desolate icon of failure history has painted. He was planning. He was engaged to be married to a wealthy childhood sweetheart, Mrs. Sarah Elmira Shelton, in Richmond, Virginia. He was touring, lecturing, and trying desperately to secure funding for his lifelong dream, a literary magazine he would call The Stylus. He had a purpose. He had a future. On September 27, 1849, he left Richmond. He was bound for Philadelphia, where he was to finalize an editing deal for a collection of poems by a woman named Mrs. St. Leon Loud. The journey was simple. The route was well known. But somewhere between the stations of life and death, the train of his existence jumped the rails. The historical record provides a blank chasm of 6 days. 6 days where Edgar Allan Poe simply vanished from the face of the earth. He never arrived in Philadelphia. He did not complete his business. He did not contact his fiancée. He was swallowed by the American Eastern Corridor, a phantom in the burgeoning urbanity. And then, on a dark, wet Wednesday, October 3rd, 1849, the phantom reappeared, and the circumstances of his reappearance are the stuff of pure Gothic terror. The scene is Baltimore. The place is a tavern called Ryan's Inn, also known as the Fourth Ward Polls, a place that was, on this day, acting as an impromptu polling place for local elections. A typesetter named Joseph W. Walker, who worked for the Baltimore Sun, was walking down the street when he saw him. A man was lying half-conscious, sprawled in the gutter outside the tavern. Walker recognized the face instantly. It was Edgar A. Poe, but it was not the Edgar A. Poe. The man in the gutter was a ruin. He was dirty, disheveled, delirious, and visibly in a state of profound distress. His eyes were wild. He was sweating and shivering simultaneously, caught in a fevered cycle. He was, to use the chilling term of the era, insensible. But the most disturbing detail, the detail that throws the veil of utter mystery over the scene, was the clothes. Poe was not wearing his own attire. He was wearing garments that were cheap, ill-fitting, and filthy. They were completely alien to him. They were not the clothes of a famous lecturer traveling to Philadelphia. They were the discarded rags of a beggar or a drunken laborer. He was in disguise, or rather, he had been dressed in a disguise. Walker, profoundly shocked, managed to communicate with the delirious man long enough to glean one name, Dr. Joseph E. Osiph. Snodgrass. Walker dispatched a note to the doctor, a known advocate for the temperance movement, describing the horrifying discovery. The note read, "Dear Sir, there is a man, rather the worse for wear, whom I think is Edgar A. Poe, and who is sadly in need of immediate assistance. He is at Ryan's 4th Ward Polls." Dr. Snodgrass arrived and immediately arranged for Poe to be transported by carriage to the Washington Medical College, a charity hospital. This carriage ride was the last time anyone would communicate with the poet. Snodgrass later provided a terrifying testimony of that ride. Poe was coherent for only fleeting moments. He was raving, muttering of a wife named Reynold whom he could not locate. He saw phantoms on the walls. He cried out with agonizing intensity. He was, in short, seized by a consuming madness. For the next 4 days, from October 3rd to the morning of October 7th, Poe was kept in a private room at the college. He was guarded. He was ministered to, but he never regained continuous lucidity. His physician, Dr. John J. Moran, observed him closely. Moran reported that Poe suffered from violent episodes of delirium, alternating with periods of deep, catatonic stupor. When he was questioned, when Moran attempted to ask him what had happened during those lost 6 days, he could offer no answer. He could not explain the clothes. He could not explain the gutter. He could not explain the delirium. On the night before his death, Moran described a profound descent into terror. Poe spent the evening conversing with imaginary entities on the walls, addressing figures that only his fevered eyes could perceive. He called out names, he cried out for protection, and then he grew suddenly calm. The fever broke. The madness receded. But at 5 a.m. on Sunday, October 7th, 1849, Edgar Allan Poe whispered his last words into the stillness of the room. They were an invocation of peace, a chilling resignation. Lord, help my poor soul. And then the light went out. No family was notified in time. No official investigation was launched. The death certificate, if one was ever fully issued, was lost to time. The cause of death, to this day, is marked as a terrifying and utterly satisfying Gothic blank. The mystery is not that he died, for all things must. The mystery is how he died, and why the official narrative has never been able to account for the 6 days of vanishing and the strange close of his resurrection. We are left with the theories, and the theories are themselves tiny, horrific short stories. The theory of alcohol. This is the easiest and most frequently cited explanation. Poe was a known, if inconsistent, drinker. The symptoms of his collapse, the delirium, the hallucinations, the extreme agitation are consistent with a severe alcoholic withdrawal, a condition known as delirium tremens. The problem? Poe had just emerged from a successful period of sobriety and was on a high-stakes professional journey. Would he have risked everything for a sudden, ruinous binge? Many contemporaries argue that his sensitivity to alcohol was so profound that even a single glass could send him into a catastrophic frenzy. The theory of cooping. This is, arguably, the most disturbing and plausible of the period-specific theories. Cooping was a savage form of voter fraud practiced in Baltimore at the time. Gangs would kidnap an unsuspecting victim, ply them with massive quantities of liquor or drugs, beat them until they were compliant, and then change their clothes to make them unrecognizable. The gangs would then force the victim to vote at multiple poll stations, moving them from ward to ward, often beating them again between stops. The victim, eventually unusable, would be abandoned. The fact that Poe was found at a polling place, in strange clothes, beaten and raving, aligns perfectly with the known procedures of cooping. He may have been literally tortured and dumped after fulfilling his political function. The theory of brain congestion. The attending physician, Dr. Moran, formally concluded the cause of death is brain congestion, a catch-all term of the era that usually meant death by a cerebral event, hemorrhage, or stroke. This could have been caused by alcohol, by poison, or by a severe blow to the head, a possibility left open by the signs of beating he exhibited. The theory of poison yarbies. A final, dark theory suggests an exotic end. Was he poisoned by a rival? Unlikely. More chillingly, a prominent medical expert in the 1990s, Dr. Michael Benitez, reviewed the records and suggested that Poe's symptoms, the fluctuating lucidity, the fever, the fear of water, the delirium, are perfectly consistent with rabies. If true, Poe did not die from his own demons, but from the fatal bite of a common, unseen beast. The final, ghastly truth remains unattainable. What Baltimore holds is not the crime scene, but the terrifying aftermath. It is the echo of a brilliant mind reduced to a whimpering wreck in a rain-slicked gutter. The death of Edgar Allan Poe is the ultimate, true Gothic horror of Maryland, precisely because it lacks the clean, rational ending of one of his own stories. He was the one man who understood the geometry of terror, yet he died in the messiest, most terrifyingly random way imaginable. He was found in strangers' clothing. He spoke a stranger's language. He saw strangers' phantoms. He disappeared for 6 days and returned a ruined vessel. The wind howls through the cemetery where he lies today. And sometimes, if you stand very still in the oldest quarters of the city, near the ancient cobblestone streets, you can still hear the terrible, unanswerable question carried on the breeze. What happened to Edgar? What did he see? And who or what did they dress him up as before they threw him back into the night? The silence after the question is the true terror. This is a story about a murder. But it's not just a story about a murder, it's a story about a city, Baltimore. It's about a time, 1969, when the world was changing. But some institutions were fighting to stay exactly the same. It's a story about secrets, buried so deep they were mistaken for memories, and memories so traumatic they were mistaken for lies. This is the story of a 26-year-old woman, a beloved teacher, a nun. Her name was Catherine Ann Cesnik. And her death is not just a cold case. It is a locked room. And for 50 years, the people who hold the key have refused to open the door. This is the first of Maryland's most disturbing stories. It's the one that reaches from a lonely patch of frozen ground in 1970 all the way into the present day. A story that asks a terrible question. Who killed Sister Cathy? And what or who were they protecting? To her students, she was simply Sister Cathy. In the halls of Archbishop Keel High School, an all-girls Catholic school in suburban Baltimore, she was a beacon. It was the late 1960s, a time of upheaval, and Sister Cathy was different. She was young, vibrant, and kind. She wore a modified, more modern habit. She coached drama, she taught English, and more than that, she listened. In a world of rigid dogma and unquestionable authority, she was the person the girls felt they could talk to. She was, as many would later say, the one person they trusted. In 1969, Sister Cathy was on a sabbatical from her order, the School Sisters of Notre Dame. She had taken a job teaching at Western High School, a public school, and had moved out of the convent. She shared apartment 223 at the Carriage House Apartments in Catonsville with another nun, Sister Helen Russell Phillips. She was, for the first time, experiencing a small taste of secular life. November 7th, 1969 was a Friday. The night was cold, around 7,030 p.m. Sister Cathy told her roommate she was heading out. Her sister, Marilyn, had just gotten engaged in Pennsylvania, and Cathy wanted to buy her a present. She drove her green 1968 Ford Maverick to the Edmondson Village Shopping Center. We know she made it. We have the receipts of her movements, the small breadcrumbs of a life about to be extinguished. She went to the First National Bank and cashed a paycheck. She went to Hecht's department store to shop for that gift. And she stopped at Mully's Bakery. What happened after she left the bakery is a blank page. Sister Helen Russell! Phillips waited. As the hours passed, she grew worried. Around midnight, she made her first calls. She called her priest. She called another priest, Father Gerard Koob, a friend of Cathy's. The men came to the apartment. They waited with her. At 3,000 a.m. on November 8th, they called the police. Sister Catherine Cesnik was officially a missing person. It didn't take long to find the car. Just hours later, in the pre-dawn darkness around 40 a.m., police located her Ford Maverick. But it wasn't where it should have been. It was illegally parked, caked in mud, blocking a driveway on an adjacent street, just a short walk from her apartment. Inside, on the front seat, sat a small white box of buns from Mully's Bakery. Of Sister Cathy, there was no sign. For 2 months, Baltimore waited. The police searched. The family prayed. The newspapers ran her picture, the hopeful, kind face of a young nun. Where was she? Had she run away? Was it an accident, or was it something worse? The winter of 1969-1970 was cold. The ground froze. On January 3rd, 1970, a hunter and his son were walking through a remote, snow-dusted patch of woods in Lansdowne, a blue-collar suburb of Baltimore. The area was known to locals as a garbage dump, an informal landfill off Monumental Road. It was there, behind a stand of trees, that they saw her. Her body was frozen solid, lying in a tangled position as if she had been tossed from a car. The autopsy would later determine the cause of death. Blunt force trauma to the right side of her skull. A single, devastating blow had caused an intracerebral hemorrhage. She had been murdered. The police investigation began, but it was, by all accounts, thin. Detectives had little to go on. There were no witnesses to her abduction. No murder weapon was found. The case was a whodunit with no suspects. There was, however, one very strange lead. Father Gerard Koob, the priest who had been at Sister Cathy's apartment the night she vanished, told police that he had received 2 phone calls in the weeks after her disappearance. The caller, a man, simply said, "Sister Cathy is dead," and hung up. The investigation stalled. Theories were floated. Was it a robbery gone wrong? A random, brutal attack? Was it connected to Father Koob, who, it was rumored, had feelings for Cathy and had even considered leaving the priesthood to marry her? Police investigated him, but he was cleared. The case grew cold. The files were put away. The memory of the vibrant young teacher faded from the public consciousness, becoming just another unsolved statistic. For more than 20 years, the ground in Lansdowne held its secret. And then, in 1992, the past didn't just resurface. It erupted. Her name was Jean Weiner. In the 1960s, she was Jean Hargadon, a student at Archbishop Kiel High School. And in 1992, after decades of silence, she filed a lawsuit against the Archdiocese of Baltimore. She did so under a pseudonym, Jane Doe. Her allegations were horrific. She claimed that as a student, she had been subjected to a torrent of sexual abuse. But the man she named wasn't some stranger. He was the school's counselor and chaplain. He was Father A. Joseph Maskell. Jean's lawsuit opened a Pandora's box. Another former student, Teresa Lancaster, came forward. She filed her own suit as Jane Roe. Soon, more and more women from Keogh began to talk, to share their own stories of abuse at the hands of Maskell and, they alleged, others. They described a pattern of manipulation and terror. Maskell, they said, was not just a priest. He was a predator with immense institutional power. He was the school counselor, the one girls were sent to when they had problems. He would prey on the vulnerable, the ones from broken homes, the ones who wouldn't be believed. The abuse, they claimed, wasn't just confined to his office. They alleged he would farm them out to other men, including, they claimed, local police officers. And suddenly, the murder of Sister Cathy Cesnik was no longer a cold case. It was the potential motive. Jean Wayner's story, the one she had suppressed for over 20 years, was the connection. She claimed that as a 16-year-old student, distraught over the abuse, she had confided in the one person she trusted. She told Sister Cathy. According to Jean, Sister Cathy was horrified. She looked at Jean and said, "This is awful. I'm going to do something about this." That conversation, Jean says, happened in the fall of 1969. Sister Cathy Cesnik disappeared on November 7th. But Jean Wiener's story had one more, truly horrifying, chapter. A detail so cinematic, so grotesque, it sounds like something from a nightmare. Sometime in November, just days after Sister Cathy vanished, but 2 months before her body was officially found, Jean says Father Maskell drove her to a remote, wooded area. He walked her out to a patch of dirt and leaves, and he showed her the body. Jean described the scene in agonizing detail. She saw the maggots on the body's face. She remembered Maskell grabbing her by the chin, forcing her to look, and delivering a message that would seal her silence for decades. You see what happens when you say bad things about people? This was the theory. The motive. Sister Cathy wasn't killed in a random robbery. She was murdered because she knew. She was going to expose Father Maskell and the abuse ring he was allegedly running at a Catholic high school. And she was silenced. This theory reframed everything. It explained the power, the motive, and the potential cover-up. Because Father Maskell wasn't just a priest. He was the chaplain for both the Baltimore County Police and the Maryland State Police. He had friends in high places. He had connections. If he was the killer, he was the one man who could make an investigation disappear. The lawsuits by Jane Doe and Jane Roe in the 1990s were ultimately dismissed. Not because the claims were disproven, but because of the statute of limitations. Too much time had passed. The Archdiocese responded. In 1994, Father Maskell was finally, quietly, removed from the ministry. He was not charged with a crime. He was not sent to prison. He was sent to Ireland, where he continued to practice as a psychologist. He died of a stroke in 2001, proclaiming his innocence to the end. And there, the story might have died again. A collection of dismissed lawsuits, dead-end leads, and a dead suspect. But the women didn't stop. Jean Wayner and Teresa Lancaster, their names now public, continued to fight. And they were joined by 2 other former Keogh students, Gemma Hoskins and Abby Schaub. These women, now retired, became amateur detectives. They called themselves the Keepers of the Secret. They dug through yearbooks. They built spreadsheets. They created a Facebook group, and hundreds of women from Keogh joined, sharing stories, piecing together a mosaic of abuse and fear. They pressured the police. They pressured the media. In 2017, their quest became the subject of a 7-part Netflix docuseries, The Keepers. The series brought the Baltimore case to the world, and it was a sensation. It laid out the timeline, the victims' stories, and the towering wall of silence they had faced from the two institutions that dominated their world, the church and the police. The series pointed to a mountain of circumstantial evidence, Maskell's history of abuse, which the archdiocese later admitted it knew about as early as 1967, when he was accused of abusing an altar boy at a different parish before he was transferred to Keogh. The testimony of multiple women, the timing of the murder, the alleged threat from Maskell to Jean Weiner, the pressure from the series worked. The Baltimore County Police, facing a global spotlight, reopened the case, and they announced a major step. They had obtained a small, unidentified DNA sample from a twig at the 1970 crime scene. It was a long shot, but it was evidence. In February 2007, with a court order, investigators went to Holy Family Cemetery in Randallstown. They exhumed the body of Father A. Joseph Maskell. The world waited. This was it. This was the moment of truth. The scientific proof that would finally connect the priest to the murder and validate the stories of dozens of women. In May 2007, the results came back. It was not a match. The DNA from the crime scene, police announced, did not belong to Father Joseph Maskell. It was a stunning, deflating blow. For the authorities, it complicated the simple narrative. For the archdiocese, it was a form of vindication. They had long maintained that while Maskell was a horrific abuser, they had, by this point, paid a $472,000 settlement to 16 of his victims. There was no hard evidence linking him to the murder, but for the women and for the police, the case wasn't closed. A DNA non-match is not an exoneration. The DNA sample was small and its origin unclear. It could have belonged to the killer. It could have belonged to an accomplice. It could have been from someone who had simply been in the dumping ground. The police stated it officially. This does not rule him out as a suspect. The DNA profile from the crime scene has since been run against half a dozen other suspects. It has been sitting in the federal CODIS database for years. No matches. So where does that leave the case of Sister Catherine Cesnik? It remains open. It remains unsolved. And it remains one of the darkest stains on the state of Maryland. The questions that linger are as cold and as hard as the ground where she was found. If Father Maskell wasn't the killer, who was? Was it an accomplice? Was it someone else entirely? And what about the other body? Just days after Sister Cathy vanished, but before she was found, the body of another young woman, 20-year-old Joyce Malecki, was found in a wooded area at Fort Meade. Her case is also unsolved. Jean Weiner, Jane Doe, has long stated that the spot where Joyce was found is the same spot where Maskell showed her sister Cathy's body. Is there a connection? As recently as late 2023, the FBI exhumed Joyce Malecki's body, a sign that after 55 years, investigators are still pulling at that one dark thread. The story of Sister Cathy is a disturbing one, not just because of the brutal, unsolved murder of a young nun. It is disturbing because of the secrets it exposed. It's a story of profound and systemic failure. It's the story of a high school that was supposed to be a sanctuary, but for some was a hunting ground. It's the story of institutions that, when faced with a choice between protecting children and protecting their own reputation, allegedly chose themselves. The true horror of this Maryland story is not a single act of violence on a November night in 1969. It is the decades of silence that followed. It is the power of a single, evil man and the institutions that allowed him to flourish, and it is the agonizing, unanswered question that still echoes from a lonely grave in Lansdowne. Who killed Sister Cathy? And will they ever, truly, be brought to justice?